Hey guys, back to another week of 52 Lockup. And for this week, we dive into Carla Homolka, and I apologize if I butcher names. It's just who I am. And Paul Bernardo. That's right, the infamous Ken and Barbie killers. There's a reason why they kind of hitched to that name. So yes, I know the story has been done before, but I wanted to kind of cover it like in my way. So make sure you be sure to like, subscribe, leave me a comment, give me some feedback for 52 Lockup, 52 Weeks, 52 Crimes. Let's get started. Or Carla. Carla Leanne Homolka was born on May 4th, 1970 to Karel Homolka, who was actually an alcoholic Czechoslovak immigrant, to his Ontario wife, Dorothy Seeger. Now, she worked as a geriatric clinic employee. She had two younger sisters, Lori and Tammy. We'll return to Tammy later in the story. So Carla was considered to be like a very bright child, good student, doted on by her father, but the father would also like insult the mother and the kids whenever he had like a drunk episode. And then he would just sort of hide in the basement afterwards. So, eventually, in between all this chaos, her father did take on a mistress. And the wife's response was like, I guess we can just do a threesome and pretend everything's normal. This may not be what I wanted, but okay. Carla was also described as stubborn, a little domineering, being unable to compromise with other children, and always willing to speak her mind, which is an interesting aspect taking into consideration what happens like later on. As she was growing up, she develops like depression. She even attended, she started to develop a depression after she began to attend Sir Winston Churchill Secondary School, during which she would do a rebellious thing where she would dress in a non-conforming manner. She began to cut herself and then claim false suicide attempts as a way to gain attention. So she's addicted to that kind of thing. So she later develops like these sadistic, masochistic, fantasies. Although considered pretty and popular and loved by everyone, she still had all these other issues she was struggling with. So she had a strong passion for animals. She even got a part-time job at a pet store while she was in high school. Graduated in 1988. Then she was immediately hired by Thorold Veterinary Clinic as a full-time veterinary technician. Look at her, ambitious. When she was 17, her passion for animals led her to a pet convention in 1987, where she met Paul. And between them, there was an immediate spark, and then after that, they just became inseparable. Now, I kind of just summed up Carla's life, because she's just kind of like your sense in an average teen, just growing, developing. And when she's 17 is primarily when she meets Paul, and Paul's background is different. So Paul Bernardo was born on August 24th of 1964. He was one of three kids from Marilyn Bernardo. Paul's childhood, apparently, his parents had a very unhappy marriage. And a lot of this came from the result of Kenneth's abuse, right? So later on in life, he would face charges, Kenneth, that is, would face charges for being a peeping Tom, pedophile, and it kind of makes me wonder, did this have a psychological impact on Paul, on his famous future, right? So Kenneth was abusive to the other family members. He had even molested Paul's sister, and this was just a dark household, right? So Paul's mom, Marilyn, she was very depressed. She would often leave her family to visit sisters she had reconnected on the weekend, and then just leave the kids there to fend for themselves. And then when she would return, she would just retreat to the basement. Although in Paul's youth, it was obvious that he came from a broken home, but he was kind of still described as a happy child. But unfortunately, by the age of 10, he started to fall in love with fires when he was in the Boy Scouts. So he started to show that's his passion, fire, right? So in 1981, when he was 16 years old, he learns that Kenneth, the abusive father this whole time, is not his biological father. And it turns out it's actually the person that his mother actually favored, who was called her once favorite suitor. I don't know why they kept referring to it, but whatever. After this happens, Bernardo starts calling his mom a whore. She calls him a bastard, and if you're unaware, bastard is a fatherless child, so words was flaring. So Paul begins to date his first girlfriend, Nadine Bramer, but his controlling behavior led her to leave him for one of his friends. His response was, I'm gonna take my 10-year-old passion of fire and I'm gonna burn everything she's ever given me. I'm okay, I get it. You're hurting. All right, we can let that slide. He finally graduates and he joins a company called Amway. He dove deep into his books and would listen to tapes of like famous motivational speakers and started applying their lessons to go hit on women and seduce women at the bar with his friends. You know, the typical patriarchy shit. However, by the time he begins to attend the University of Toronto at Scarborough, he begins to develop like these very dark sexual fantasies, particularly of rape. Now, one of his fantasies included a virgin farm where he would breed virgin girls to rape. It became later known that he enjoyed forcing anal sex and degrading any of his dates in public. Like, this was just fair game. Over time, any relationship he did have, like, the time frame would get shorter and shorter and shorter. And then the shorter the time frame got, the more of his vast span. Like, well, I'm not going to date everyone. He started increasing the number of women he was dating because no one wanted to stay with him, right? Obviously. So with all of his girlfriends, they all stated he was very abusive. He would threaten he would kill them if they spoke about the abuse. And unfortunately, women's voices were like kind of still being gathered to be heard, like, you know, during these times. Although women could vote, there was a lot of things that women can do. There were still a lot of obstacles that women faced and still face today. So he feared, they feared his words and the backlash of society if they spoke up because, you know, rape culture includes the victim blame game. So now in 1986, 2 women were finally granted restraining orders against Paul because he was out of it. One of them, he was making like obscene phone calls. And I mean, if you're looking at if Gerald Galt, like in comparison, you see that Gerald Galt was able to make these obscene phone calls and get arrested, but Paul wasn't. But all right, whatever. I digress. And he was doing everything he can, basically, whether it was rape, coercion, he was doing all he can to just whatever, right? So now he meets Carla, 1986, right? Now, Paul, prior to meeting her, had already begun his serial raping spree in 1986 before he meets her. At least for the ones that are known. So let's follow through what we do know, right? May 4th, 1987, he raped a 21-year-old girl, Scarborough woman, in front of her parents' house. After he had followed her home, oddly enough, it was on Carla's birthday before a meeting. 10 days later, chose not to control himself, raped a 19-year-old woman in the backyard of her parents' home. July 17th, 1987, attempted rape after beating his victim and abandoned her when she chose to fight back. September 29th, 1987, attempted rape of a 15-year-old girl after breaking into her home. He had jumped on her back, threatened her with a knife. He only fled because the mom entered the room and screamed. That's it. Now, just as a simple side note, a man named Anthony Hainmayer was actually convicted for that crime after being wrongfully identified as the man in the room by the mom because he had fled the scene so quickly. So he served a 16-month sentence until he was exonerated after Paul Bernardo admitted to the crime in like 2006. So like, I guess he helped somebody out, right? Whatever. Now, October 1987, Carla begins having threesomes for Paul because she has her first one with him, I believe, with Debbie Purdy, which is interesting because you think back what happened with her mom and you're like, okay, so she probably thinks this is normal, right? So December 16th, 1987, he rapes another 15-year-old girl, and immediately the next day, the Metropolitan Toronto Police issues a warning to women about a serial rapist. December 23rd, 1987, Paul rapes a 17-year-old girl with a knife. He was starting to kind of add to his like criminal ritual, right? Like he's developing his system. And at this point, he now develops the name Scarborough Rapist, right? Like he was very busy committing these crimes and yet found the time to go to a pet convention to meet Carla. You know, priorities, I guess, right? So Paul starts to run every aspect of Carla's life. He starts telling her what she can wear, how to style her hair, what opinions to have, what to eat. He calls her fat. He calls her ugly, you know, typical misogynistic patriarchy crap, right? Now, here's the problem. He learns that Carla is not a virgin. He's still interested in her, but not as interested, right? So this is very, very key important. So March 1988, Carla's friend Lisa discovers something that's referred to as the list. Now, Carla writes about having a healthy diet, exercising regularly, and having good hygiene. Then she also writes in regards to Paul and their relationship that never let anyone know our relationship is anything but perfect. Don't talk back to Paul. Be a perfect girlfriend for Paul. If Paul asks for a drink, bring him one quickly and happily. Remember you're stupid. Remember you're ugly. Remember you're fat. I don't know why I tell you these things, because you never change. That's what's written in her list of things to keep in mind. And obviously, her friend is obviously very upset. Now we move into April 18th, 1988. 17-year-old girl he rapes. May 25th, 1988. Paul was almost caught by an investigator who was actually staking out a bus shelter, who spotted him and began to pursue him. Unfortunately, he escaped. Now, May 30th. I presume because that one got away on the 25th, he was not able to, complete his task. So, unfortunately, he successfully rapes 18-year-old girl in Ontario, going about 25 miles southwest of Scarborough to kind of get out of the vicinity. Now, I presume it's because the cops were so actively looking for him. That's probably why he veered off over to the side. And then he just has a random hiatus, or at least so we think, right? So October 4th, 1988, there's another attempted rape. But this victim fought back. And in regards to her fighting back while he had the knife, he did stab her in the thigh and the butt, and she did require 12 stitches. But yeah, she fought back. Around November of 1988, Bernardo meets another girl named Anna. He begins dating her while he is with Carla, while he is in Toronto. And Paul also begins to become attracted to Carla's younger sister, Tammy. Oh, we're making a full circle now, right? So he demands that Tammy will not have sex with any other guy, right? This is what he's telling Carla. Now, November 16th, he rapes an 18-year-old girl in the backyard of her parents' house. And then again, the following day, the Metro Police form a task force to capture him, because they're like, we got to get this dude, because he's not stopping. December 27th, 1988, attempted rape, but he is chased off by a neighbor. Now, the wheels are starting to turn, right? So Carla's going through all this verbal abuse, all this extra abuse, and all this that's just going on, right? So now he takes a longer hiatus, I presume, from what we found. Then resumes on June 20th, 1989. Attempted rape, except this woman now actually fights back, and she screams, the neighbors are alerted, the whole 9 yards, he flees. August 15th, rapes a 22-year-old young woman. November 21st, 1989, rapes a 15-year-old girl that you saw at a bus shelter. December 22nd, 1989, raped a 19-year-old young lady. This man was absolutely busy. He found a way to keep his schedule going. And in 1990, Paul is on his 11th rape of a 19-year-old woman, exiting a bus, but this victim was able to actually help police create a computer composite, right? And it's released 2 days later. This is insane. He was just building up a record. Finally, July 1990, I'm so into this. 2 months of searching and receiving tips that Bernardo resembled the Scarborough rapist composite. Then he was interviewed and snatched up. The police are getting closer and closer, right? Now we're looking at November 1990. 2 detectives interview Paul for 35 minutes. Paul happily gives them his hair, saliva, blood samples for testing, swears that he is not the Scarborough rapist, and he walks out of there fine. They don't even go back to him just yet, right? Now, I will get back to that in the DNA testing in a second. Now, however, this tip did not come fast enough to them in December of 1990, right? Because now by this point, Paul and Carla are now engaged, and Paul's in here hey, babe, you're not a virgin. Your sister has something that I want, but, you can't give it to me. And she's like, I know what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna give him the one gift that I can't give him, my sister. So Bernardo is 26, engaged to Carla at 20 years old, right? She was living with her family, right? St. Catharines, Ontario. And that Christmas Eve, while Homolka's parents and younger sister went to bed upstairs, Carla makes the choice to package her sister up for good old Paul. She gives her sister a couple drinks, so she thinks she's hanging out with the older people, and then she's drugged. Bernardo rapes her. Homolka actually participates and videotapes the sexual assault against her younger sister, who is 15 years old. Whoa, sister of the year, right? Now, Carla and Paul decide to rape Tammy, right? By putting her the crush pills in her drink, whatever. And it's mind-boggling to picture, like, never mind. I'm going to continue with the story because I'm all messed up. So now Tammy begins to choke on her own vomit, and now she can't be revived. She died. Her death was ruled as no suspect of foul play. Like, there's no foul play. Like, because 15-year-olds just drop dead for, like, nothing. But whatever. I'm sorry. I'm just, like, heated, right? So Carla later explains that she wanted to give him a teen's virginity as a Christmas present. Anyway, Tammy later dies on at the hospital. And the couple was able to convince the family and the authorities that the teen's death was accidental. The fuck? So a few weeks later, they end up filming a notorious video called the Fireside Chat, in where Homolka, yes, that's right, dresses up as her sister, and then her and Paul discuss their enjoyment of the crime that they had before having sex on Tammy's bed. Then they went on to abduct and rape and murder 3 more teenage girls, videotaping the torture of one, like, including one where a body was, like, dismembered. Like, it's serious. Now you're starting to get why they were called the Ken and Barbie killers, right? Because everything looked perfect. Now, the Ken and Barbie killers they're now, like, set to get married in 1991 because, live their lives. Now, before this all happened, Paul gets bitten by Carla's pet iguana and gets really pissed off. His solution to it is, I'm going to kill her iguana, cut its head off, barbecue it, and eat its body parts. April 26, 1991, Paul commits his next rape of a 14-year-old girl that he was stalking around at a bus stop. Carla now begins preying on her younger sister's friends for Paul, like particularly this young one, Jane Doe. Jane Doe is a whole other chapter by herself because she's probably one of the few that I would say that was not killed just because of the circumstances. Now, keep this in mind. Carla is 21 years old. She keeps inviting the 15-year-old, we're going to call Jane Doe, back to their home with Paul. Now, Jane Doe would drink enough, like, peach schnapps to, like, make herself, like, sick as a teen, not knowing how to, like, really handle alcohol. And then she would return to her mom going, oh, no, I just have the flu, right? Because, she's being rebellious, right? Now, this became frequent where Jane Doe would actually visit the Bernardos' home despite her mother's opposition to their growing relationship because she couldn't figure out why was a married couple so interested in a 15-year-old girl, right? So now, the videos the Bernardos made of their sexual assaults on Miss French, which I'll get to after, Miss Mahaffey, and Miss Doe have all been shown in court, which is later on, right? Now, to explain what Jane Doe had explained in the courtroom, she describes to them what she considered them to be the perfect couple. And she wrote them a letter explaining about that. She's like, you guys are the perfect couple, and, like, I hope I find a guy like Paul, and he's, like, good looking and sweet and caring person. She's just enamored by their relationship. So August 1991, Carla even invites Jane Doe to drug and rape her. In the midst of all this stuff, at some point, she drugs her too much, like she did with Tammy, her sister. She stops breathing, and Carla calls 911, right? And then suddenly she starts breathing again. She's like, oh, nah, I'm good. She's good. My bad. Hangs up the phone. So from the fall of 1991 through Christmas of 1992, Jane Doe was visiting their home, like, every weekend, right? And these visits included her having sex, which Jane Doe admits to in court, right? Now, Bernardo would take her into the bedroom and say he wanted her to perform oral sex on him, and she would agree to because he had told her if she didn't keep him happy, Carla would not be happy. And she wanted to keep Carla happy because she perceived Carla as like the big sister she's always wanted, right? So he tells her, now I want to have intercourse with you. You can't have sex with anyone else. And she's like, well, aren't you married? Isn't intercourse, like, the bad thing because, like, I'm a virgin and you're married? The answer was not enough. So he told her he would be the first man to have sex with her. And then eventually she promised, and she fulfilled her promise when she was drugged. Though Carla knew what was happening to Jane Doe and the sexual encounters, Jane Doe, the little teenager, said the older woman never seemed jealous. The first crack in the relationship between the teenager and this couple came when Jane Doe's writing instructor had told the girl's mother about the affair with Paul. So she said in the courtroom, like, my mom confronted me about it, and I had told her he had touched my breast. So Jane Doe later explains that Bernardo gets pissed, and he's like, "What? Why didn't you just tell them it was, like, your idea? Why you gotta tell her it's me?" So their relationship ended between the teenager, but however, this is like around like 1992 Christmas. But when Jane Doe told Bernardo that she was not interested in having sex with him, he became more angry, which is why he ended up raping and drugging her, right? He had told her that she was worthless and that she didn't deserve to live. Now we're starting to see the wheels turning, right? Now, she says in the living room, he had picked up a picture of her and threw it across the room. Then he carried Carla to the bedroom and left her alone at the bottom of the stairs for the next 45 minutes while she waited for her mother to pick her up. Jane Doe also admitted that Bernardo had stood at the top of the stairs just like glaring at her. So it's like, I'm in control here. So Jane Doe stopped receiving a lot of the calls from them because the mom started interjecting because she knew something was up, but she didn't have like the full details, right? Because this is supposed to be good old Carla. And she couldn't figure out like, why are these 20-year-olds hanging out with someone who's 6 to 10 years younger than them, right? Like, where are your friends? So despite the efforts of trying to like stay in between this, Mommy Dearest decides, she told Bernardo, like, you gotta stop buying my girl gifts, stop showing up at the house, like, leave it be, stay away. He tells Mom, but I like to give my gifts to my girlfriends. So anyway, Mom of Jane Doe confronts Bernardo with the teacher's allegations, and she was actually scared of him on what happened. So she ends up telling like her co-workers, she's telling everyone where she's gonna be, the time frame. She's got keys clutched between her fingers. She was going for Paul. Like, you stay the fuck away from my kid. So Bernardo gets mad. He starts to follow her out the door, and Jane Doe's mom starts screaming from the top of the porch. As she's like heading to her car, she's driving away, and he was still yelling at her, right? And she knew at that moment, like, I'm right about this dude. Like, something is not right. So while all these things are going on with Miss Jane Doe, still, June 15th to 17th, 1991, the couple grabs Leslie Mahaffey, 14 years old. She's late for curfew. Paul comes up behind her, blindfolds her, puts in a car. Carla tortures her and rapes her while videotaping because, it's not happening if you didn't record it. Murdered her. Paul strangles her, and then they leave her body in the basement until they figure out what they want to do with her. Then they decide, we should cut her up into pieces with a circular saw and dump her remains in Lake Gibson, which, by the way, her remains were discovered at the end of June 1991. And then the couple gets married. They're like, oh my God, he put a ring on it. And April 16th to 19th of 1992, Carla and Paul now abduct Kristen French, who's age 15. Carla's like asking for direction, gets her out of the car, pulls out a map. Paul comes up behind her with a knife, and they force her into the car, torture, rape her. For 3 days, Paul brutally rapes and sexually tortures Kristen French in their home, in him and Carla's home. Paul even orders Carla to participate and record the events again. He's like, hey, join in, babe. During these 3 days, Kristen is shown a videotape of Leslie Mahaffey's rape, and Kristen French is murdered as well by Paul with the use of an electrocord that was used to kill Leslie as well, right? The body is now left in Carla and Bernardo's home while the two of them are visiting Carla's parents' house for dinner. Later, Paul disposes of the body in a dumpster in Burlington. Her body was discovered April 30th, 1992. Like, what? Like, what kind of couple goals are they? Like, because this actually puts like Joker and Harley Quinn to shame. Like, I'm just being honest, right? So May 1992, Paul, male childhood friend Van, notices that Paul kind of looks like the rapist profile that's been kind of going around town, right? So he calls up the cops. May 12th, the police question Paul, right, about the 2 kidnappings. They take more DNA, and he's still not considered high suspect on their suspect list, right? Now this is where it's driving me nuts, right? May 23rd, Terry Anderson's body is now found on the side of the road. It's thought to be linked to the other murders, but there's been no evidence linking Paul and Carla to that. December 1992, Jane Doe confronts Paul and Carla about being forced to have sex with Paul, because I guess now it's starting to register Is this what was happening? The world is starting to unravel, right? So then on December 27th, 1992, Paul beats the crap out of Carla with a flashlight. He caused severe facial bruising, and then by January 5th, 1993, Carla goes to her parents, gets out of the house, has her black eye, and then she's like, I am selling you out. So now Paul is arrested, charged with assault, released on, I think, recognized or something like that. The cops begin to test his DNA, and now they're finding matches. Paul's in big trouble now. February 24th, 1993, Carla is arrested, and she agrees, hey, I'll give up Paul if I get a lenient sentence, because, BWS, right? She ends up being arrested, and then she immediately grants for her divorce, right? She's like, opposition for my divorce is if it's actually granted during this time. March 1993, Paul's father is sentenced to 9 months in jail and 3 months probation for assaulting a woman. It's like a family affair. Like, everyone's going to jail. Paul's getting arrested, Carla's getting arrested, Dad's getting arrested. It's just like, wow, everyone's together. Now, Carla's against 2 counts of manslaughter and goes through a psychological evaluation. One of the specialists in the psychology of battered women syndrome, Peter Jaffe, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, but it's Jaffe, explained that theoretically, Carla could fit the profile of a woman forced through physical and psychological torture to aid Bernardo's alleged crimes, as Carla suggested. However, even if she was a battered woman syndrome, and this is just my personal opinion, I believe she was actually an aggressive hybristophiliac. Now, hybristophiliac is who's aroused by those criminal acts, right? By their partner. Now, an aggressive one will participate because they enjoy it as well. Hybristophilia is actually still being analyzed and is still being studied today. I had even posted up a survey online because I was just curious to like what responses I would get. And just as a side note, I receive responses from both genders. So I know there's a lot of focus like, oh, women have hybristophilia, but I got responses from both genders. Now, here's the interesting part. There were men that were interested in women who had committed horrific crimes, right? But they weren't as willing to fully engage or pursue them. A woman who has hybristophilia, who was attracted to a man for committing these crimes, and was in prison for them, would pursue some sort of relationship with them, and they all, for the most part, gave me a very general answer in their own way. And their answer for being with those kind of people was because that person could not hurt them because they were locked away, which is actually really interesting, especially for those women falling underneath passive hybristophilia versus the aggressive. And it's interesting because it makes me wonder, is that the reason why the males don't pursue the female? Because they don't need to feel safe, or maybe they would maybe it makes them feel unsafe. I don't know. But I mean, it's hard to call it, but like, battered woman syndrome begins like, it's an abusive cycle, right? It comes in 3 stages. First, the abuser engages in behavior that creates a relationship tension, right? There's tension there, right? Second, the tension explodes, right? When the abuser commits some form of abuse, whether it's physical, psychological, emotional, sexual, or if they're creative, right? Otherwise, the third stage is when the abuser tries to fix their wrongdoing and apologizes. Now, the third stage is frequently referred to as the honeymoon stage, right? It involves the abuser making amends for his bad behavior, and he's all like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean it." And the abuser is forgiven, and then the cycle starts back up again. Now, is it possible that she had BWS? Okay, sure, maybe she was developing it before the whole thing with her sister, and whatever. But BWS, I'm not completely sold on. I just feel like there's a disconnect. But let's get back to the ending, right? April 1st, Carla is now living with Brampton and her aunt and uncle, Calvin and Patricia, and she had disclosed to the police, like, hey, you can't really properly prosecute Paul unless I give you the information, right? And make an exchange, right? Because otherwise, it's just he said, she said business, right? Her lawyer is interested in protecting her. Now, they would use what Carla says, accepting her plea bargain, which means that police would now have a witness for the prosecution of Paul Bernardo in the first-degree murder. They were heavily interested in Paul, and for good reason, right? The police have murder and rape search warrants that expired, I think after 71 days. And they needed to get this done. They were no closer to proving Paul Bernardo had committed these murders to Leslie and Kristen than they had started even the investigation. So they're kind of backed into a corner. And they're like, well, if we can turn wifey against him, that's where we're going to go. So, and if she didn't accept the plea bargain, Carla was facing 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of second-degree murder and other crimes, right? So the plea bargain is accepted. Carla agrees to a 12-year term in exchange for her cooperation against Paul. Now, Paul's lawyer, Ken Murray, he goes to Paul's house, removes the 6 infamous video cassette tapes, right? Because this is all supposed to prove that Carla was just as involved in these crimes as much as possible. Because now Paul realized she's turning on him. He found them hidden in the ceiling above a bathroom light fixture. Now, the lawyer is not allowed to view the tapes until May 18th, after Paul has been convicted of first-degree murder. The tapes Murray finds show the rapes of Tammy Homolka, Leslie Mahaffey, and Kristen French, and of course, Jane Doe. By May 18th, 1993, Paul is charged with 2 counts of kidnapping, 2 counts of unlawful confinement, 2 counts of aggravated sexual assault, and first-degree murder. In addition, he is charged with dismemberment of Leslie Mahaffey's body. Now, Carla appears in court for her arraignment on 2 counts of manslaughter and a bail hearing. Her bail is set to $110,000. There are a number of conditions, but still. Anyways, she's required to appear in court on June 7th, 1993, at which time a trial date was already set for her. Her parents used her house as collateral for bail, and she's released. Guess you love your kids, right? Whatever. Paul, of so many as 30 other sexual assaults, Paul is ultimately looking at life in prison, and he's like, oh, this is not looking good. In 95, he was declared as a dangerous offender, right? Making it unlikely that he would ever see the outside again. Meanwhile, Carla, she's going to be released in prison in July 2005. She actually gets married, has 3 kids, but we'll get to that, right? But although hybristophilia is associated with women, when I look at the fact that she got married, I kind of wonder if her husband is a hybристоphiliac himself. Is he passive? And that's why he's attracted to her. Wow, you really took charge. Or if that's another weird relationship of something else. I couldn't find much about their relationship in general. Because they sold each other out, at that court thing, it was getting ugly. This was oh yeah, he made me do it. She made me do it. She was just in on it. It was serious. Anyways, now back to DNA. Rape kits. Now, those were developed in 1970 by Chicago Police Sergeant Louis Vitillo. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. He later then becomes a chief microanalyst for the city's crime lab. His kit contains plastic test tubes, swabs, and vaginal and rectal and oral smears, individual slides, mailing boxes for the smears, a comb to collect samples of something that's foreign, that's not from the victim, like hair, a nail clipper, anything to salvage as evidence. Underneath, fingerprints, stuff like that. It's also called the brown paper's bag for victims' undergarments, clothes, forms of doctors, police officers involved in the case, sealing tape, and a pencil to write on the slides. This is a full case. It's great that we have all this, but when Paul was doing all that stuff, how do you catch him? DNA testing doesn't show up until 1985. That's why it took so long. Now, there's a couple of books about their relationship, like Deadly Innocence, that was, I believe, in 1995. There's another book that's called Lethal Marriage, The Unspeakable Crimes of Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka. But yeah, this is super, 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 super intense. What the fuck were you thinking? There's so much information in between on that timeline of crap that he did before he meets her. And then when he meets her, it's just sparks are flying. Now, here's where my issue is with saying that she has, I was so engrossed into the story, I forgot that I had water. it's insane to me because I've known women who have like BWS. They're fearful of their husbands. It becomes like a vicious cycle over and over, right? But how do you jump from BWS to genuinely participating? I mean, she didn't just slightly participate. She truly got involved. She was grabbing her sister's younger friends, inviting teens over, and making sure her husband was completely happy. Now, some misogynistic prick is going to be like, she sounds like an amazing wife. Yay. But the truth is, that's one, it's not a healthy relationship unless you two agree to it. For those who are polyamorous, fine. As long as both parties agree to it, right? That's what's important. And when you look at Carla's upbringing, right, you see that how her mom handled the situation with the husband cheating and having a mistress. You can't help but to wonder if those were all the elements that really built her into who she is now. I mean, she's referred to as the Witch of Ontario. Like, that name doesn't go away. Now, although she only got 12 years, imagine her life. I mean, she tried applying for jobs. I think that was like nearby kids because she has her kids. And people petitioned and fought. Like, there was full discrimination and with proper reasoning, right? You wouldn't want her anywhere near your kids. This is the same woman who's willing to like grab kids and like give them to her husband, give her sister to her husband. Like, how do you kill your 15-year-old sister and then just act like, I don't know, I think she just drank too much. Kids. Like, really? And what's insane to me is that, like, even after all this stuff is happening, her parents still like bail her out. I mean, I'm like, I don't know. One of my kids killed the other one for their husband. That's a thin line. Like, well, have the third one so you have more than one. No, I'm kidding. In case one of them screws up. No, I'm kidding. That's a joke from some comedian I can't remember right now. But I mean, that couple, they were so ridiculously busy. And then you see Paul, you know, you see what he was like raised with. Even his father gets arrested around the time he gets arrested, and it's like for the same similar predatory behavior. And you're kind of like, were these behaviors genuinely taught to them, or was this always in their nature? Which is where the huge question of like nature versus nurture over and over kind of like replays. Now, I can understand that, yes, when you're dating or whatever, it's fine, it's exciting, but it's amazing to me like how I think Paul had a really good like hook in molding Carla to how he wanted her to be. He really groomed her to the way that he thought like this is how you need to be. I mean, he picked her up like when she was like 17, and you know he's older than her, and he was just like, yeah, that's fine. And he just groomed her the rest of the way, and I really can't picture like doing any of that for any of my exes, like ever. One of them, who was actually very verbally abusive with me, I would get up and fight with him. He knew I was not going down gently into that good night. So like when I picture and I read her story, when I understand her story, when I'm watching it on TV shows and I'm reading the book, like I put myself in her shoes and then I think to myself, nah, they were all scared of me because they knew I was going to like willing to throw hands. Like it's weird. It's very, 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 very weird and interesting. In regards to what, if someone thinks they can get away with. Now, Paul, he knew he was getting away with murder. He knew he had her completely under his control. And what's sad is that prior to this, his ability to threaten his girlfriends prior, like, if you tell anyone about my abuse, I'm going to kill you. And they knew he meant it. They knew he meant it. And unfortunately, there are a lot of guys who will do it. Like, if this isn't, like, a problem, they're just like, woman no submissive, I kill. Like, and that's a real thought, you know? So it makes sense to me, in a sense, like, how it took so long. I mean, I just gave you guys a quick update on, like, rape kits and DNA testing, and you think, like, this guy had a hell of a track record, but even, like, a sketch composite is not enough legally by law to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that this dude committed this crime, which is why Anthony had I mean, he served time because he was wrongfully identified. 16 months in prison. Just, in fact, actually, after he was released, I don't even think he was compensated after that, to be honest. I think I found that somewhere. But like, what are you doing? Like, he was making a genuine criminal career. Like, if he wasn't at work, he was out committing crimes. It's just like, I don't think I've raped in like 2 days. What am I doing with my life? Like, it's insane. And as horrific as these crimes are, I'm actually very happy that they did record their crimes, because otherwise, I don't know, like, DNA testing wasn't like what it is like now, what you're thinking of, like with CSI and Law and Order, like, oh, we got a match, we got our guy. I mean, they had their samples. And then on top of it, back then, much like, similar to like someone like Ted Bundy, they looked clean. They looked like they were not problematic. They gave the right answers. They knew how to smile. They knew how to be charismatic, which is very dangerous when it comes to psychopathic people. Psychopathic people do not feel anything. They just don't. There's no connection in their brain whatsoever. What they do understand is that other people understand emotions or are responsive and will connect with each other. So what they do is they will mimic it. And I've come across enough psychopaths to... There's something very eerie to like trying to describe it. It's like, hi. And it's not as obvious as like Stepford Wives or as like Nicole Kidman on the whole 9 yards. There's something very disconnected in their eyes. And I mean, it's very disconnected. And there's just something like you can smell it like out of nowhere. Like, something's wrong with this one. Like, you can just smell it. And Paul was demonstrating all of his psychopathic behavior as he's growing up. And of course, now he's angry to find out he's like the mailman's kid, and it just adds on to his anger towards particularly, women. And then of course, when you look at that and then you look at how society is set up where like, for the patriarchy, and someone's going to be all like, oh my God, feminist, like, you hate men. I don't hate men. What I hate is the system that is set up for women, where women are not provided quite the fair opportunities, or the fact that someone like Paul can either drug or coerce with someone, or drug them or rape someone, and they're too scared to speak out on it because rape culture believes in blaming the victim. I mean, that's intense. I mean, if you were dealing with that, you wouldn't speak up about the crimes because you know that you would be blamed. And it's not just, although yes, there are men who have been raped and stuff like that by other men, and it's by the victimization of the patriarchy. Like, it really, really is. And it's insane when you kind of like look at this, like, this was just like a ticking time bomb that was just waiting to fully explode. And then you look at Carla is just... she's just a lost kid this whole time. So Paul creates this side of her that no one's ever truly seen. And then it's sad because, yes, she got 12 years. Maybe you're like, oh, she deserved more. I can definitely agree to that. But she will never truly be free. She cannot walk around. She has changed her name. People recognize her. Like, people actively still look for her, and I can't blame them, because you would not want her to be friends with your wife, with your sister, with your kids. You wouldn't want her near your house, and I can understand, because Paul, I guess there's an expectation, right? Like, he's a monster. We put him away. But with Carla, she's the one that fed the monster. She's the one that fed the machine happily and willingly, and even was willing to sell her younger sister for the sake of making her fiance happy, while he's been cheating on her and then abusing other people. Like, this is a very insane case, and it's just like every time I go over, I find out like new facts and new things about it, and it's just simply like, it's mind-blowing. What I want to know is that, do you think Carla Homolka actually had battered woman syndrome, or do you think she was actually an aggressive hypersophiliac? Do you feel like she's a sociopath? Sociopaths similar to a psychopath. The difference is the psychopath will have no remorse. A sociopath is more prone to actually having the remorse. They're going to do it anyway, but they'll be like, like there's a pause, right? Every time I say sociopath, I always think of Harley Quinn from her like Batman movie. She's like, sociopath. So everyone gets them mixed up. Like, the whole thing, like it's a ridiculous scene. But what do you think of Carla? Aren't you grateful that DNA evidence has now become like a normal thing opposed to what it was then? I mean, look how long it took them and how many crimes Paul committed before they could even find him. Doing something like that left and right, being on the parents' backyard, the parents' front yard, like this CCC, this camera footage everywhere you go. Like, there's no way Paul could have done the damage the way he was doing his damage to his victims if he had tried doing that today. No way. I don't see it. But yeah, and kudos to that guy giving us like the rape kits and stuff in the 70s. Like, you're a hero. His granddaughter actually, I believe, wrote a book as well. Like, she's a cool lady. But yeah, that is the story of the Ken and Barbie killers. I thought this would be appropriate. I don't know if you guys could appreciate the blue. But yeah, this is but yeah, I hope you enjoyed the case. I hope you enjoyed listening to everything that happened with this case, and I hope you were able to follow with everything. But there was just like so much information, and I was trying to like condense it, and there was just no way you can condense all the crap that they were doing, because everything is happening simultaneously. He's out here raping this one, he's attempting to rape this one, then he comes home and abuses Carla, and then he treats on Carla, and then this one's coming over to the house because he's like, oh no, if you don't make Carla happy, I'll be unhappy if you don't go downstairs. You know what I mean? Like that's insane. There's no straight timeline of anything. It's not like I guess with other crimes where you can kind of follow in with it, like opposed to like last week with Seth Jackson, you can follow the timeline of when things start to go like, and then with this one, it's just like just going everywhere. You're like, what in the world? Like, I live a very busy life, but like I am too busy to be committing crimes. Like, you gotta be dedicated. He's out there like, I think I got it. I'm going to make time at 3:00. Like, anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this story. If you have any questions, my references will be down in the video, of course, this video description, for links that you can find, and just do better. Like, do better. I mean, I guess it makes sense to call them the Ken and Barbie killers. I mean, besides the fact that they look perfect, I mean, everything is plastic is fake, right? But do better. Like, really, because if you got that much time to be doing that, there's a lot you can do. Like, there's a lot. There's an awful lot. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed, and catch you guys next week.